There is a unique kind of heartbreak that comes not from strangers nor enemies, but from those who once tucked you in at night, who held your hand through storms, who shared your blood and bore your name. The pain inflicted by family doesn't echo like ordinary sorrow. It burrows, deep and silent, into the bones of your being. It doesn't scream. It whispers betrayal in your quietest moments. It distorts love into something unrecognizable, something conditional, manipulative, even cruel. Have you ever sat in a room full of relatives and felt like a ghost, present in flesh but invisible in worth? Have you ever been blamed for the wounds they caused you? Or perhaps you spent years shrinking yourself just to keep the peace, hoping that one day they would see your heart, only to be met with cold silence or sharpened words. There's a heaviness that comes with trying to be loyal to people who have only taught you to doubt yourself. And when those people are your family, the confusion runs deeper than logic can reach. Because we are told, no, conditioned, to believe that family is sacred, unbreakable, untouchable. We are told to forgive, to endure, to keep quiet. We are told that love is enough, that blood is thicker than pain. But what happens when the ones who should protect you become the source of your deepest wounds? What happens when love is used as a weapon and silence is the price of acceptance? It is not rebellion to recognize toxicity. It is revelation. It is not betrayal to protect your peace. It is survival. And yet guilt creeps in like a thief in the night, whispering lies that you are the problem, that your boundaries are dishonor, that your distance is ungratefulness. Let me ask you something. What if God is not asking you to suffer in silence, but to step into freedom? What if the path to peace does not lie in fixing what is broken, but in letting go of what you were never meant to carry? What if the guilt you feel is not divine conviction, but emotional manipulation disguised as love? You see, God never called you to sacrifice your soul at the altar of family dysfunction. He never called you to confuse loyalty with self-destruction. He never asked you to stay in places where your worth is buried beneath generations of unhealed trauma. No, He is the God of peace, not chaos, of clarity, not confusion, and sometimes, in His mercy, He allows the shaking so that the masks fall off and the truth is seen. When your spirit grows restless, when your tears become prayers, when the walls of your childhood home feel more like a battlefield than a refuge, that may be the moment God begins to whisper, it's time to come out from among them. It's time to choose peace over pain, purpose over pleasing, calling over comfort. But choosing peace does not mean choosing bitterness, and setting boundaries does not mean severing love. It means trusting that God can lead you through the wreckage without letting it define you. It means believing that your healing does not need their approval, and your future does not need their permission. There is a sacred kind of peace that comes not from reconciliation, but from release. A peace born not in fixing others, but in finally becoming whole yourself. And the journey to that peace begins not in confrontation, but in quiet surrender to the one who sees what they've done and still calls you chosen. So if your soul is tired, if your smile feels forced, if your heart aches in rooms that should feel safe, maybe, just maybe, this is your permission to let go and let God lead you to the peace you've been too afraid to imagine. They laugh with you at dinner, share old stories, pass the salt with casual kindness. But deep within you, there's an ache you can't quite describe. A hollow, persistent ache that comes not from what's said, but from what's never acknowledged. You sit among them, smiling, performing your part in the family theater, and yet inside, you feel like an outsider looking in, not because you want to be distant, but because your heart has learned, through years of small dismissals and subtle rejections, that being fully seen in that space is dangerous. Toxicity in family relationships isn't always loud. It isn't always in the slap or the scream. Sometimes it's the quiet refusal to understand you. It's the condescending glance when you express your emotions. It's being labeled too sensitive for simply asking to be treated with respect. It's the silence after your accomplishments, the lack of interest in your pain, the minimization of your struggles, and the celebration of your failure when you're not around. It's in the way your presence is tolerated, but your voice is not welcome. And yet, you smile. You smile because you were taught that love means endurance, that peace is more important than truth, that family matters more than your mental health. You smile because the alternative, confrontation, distance, or being labeled ungrateful, is too terrifying to consider. So you carry the weight in your chest, suppressing your truth, to maintain a connection that feels more like a prison than a bond. But what no one sees is what it's doing to you behind the scenes, the way your confidence has slowly eroded over time, the way you second-guess your own memories, the way you've convinced yourself that maybe you are the problem. You replay conversations in your mind, wondering if you were too harsh, too emotional, too much. But deep down you know, you were just asking to be treated like you mattered. The betrayal is deeper because it comes from those who should have cherished you first. The pain is sharper because it's wrapped in a disguise of family love. They say things like, "We just want what's best for you," but their actions scream control. They claim, "We only said that because we care," yet their words cut deeper than strangers ever could. You were raised to respect them, but they never learned how to respect your humanity in return. And what makes it harder is the world doesn't see it. To others, your family looks kind, united, maybe even noble. They see the family photos, the celebrations, the shared prayers. But they don't see what happens when the door closes. They don't hear the dismissive tones. They don't witness the backhanded compliments. They don't know the guilt that chokes you when you try to assert yourself, or the shame you feel when you finally break down in private. Because to them, it's just family. And to the world, family is untouchable, so you remain quiet. You become a master of emotional disguise. You show up to gatherings with your best clothes and your heaviest burdens. You become the peacemaker, the fixer, the one who never rocks the boat. You play your role so well that even you forget how unhappy you truly are, but your heart remembers. It aches in the silence. It pleads for a voice. It longs for a space where love doesn't come with a cost. This is the silent pain, the one that doesn't scream but whispers through sleepless nights and forced laughter. The kind that makes you question your own reality. The kind that tells you to smile on the outside while you're breaking on the inside. The kind that most people never see, but God does. He sees every moment you swallowed your truth for their comfort. He sees every tear you hid behind a polite nod. He sees the weight you carry just to be accepted by those who should have loved you freely. Guilt is a quiet tyrant. It doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't storm into your life with fire and fury. Instead, it enters gently, disguised as duty, cloaked in love, wrapped in phrases like, "You owe us," or "After everything we've done for you." It convinces you that self-sacrifice is holiness, that your pain must be endured for the sake of honor, that questioning toxic behavior is the ultimate betrayal. And when it comes from family, it feels like a spiritual weight tied to your very soul. You begin to carry it like a sacred burden. You sit in rooms where your heart feels suffocated, where your presence is taken for granted, and you convince yourself that this is what love looks like. You stay quiet when their words hurt you. You show up when your soul is drained. You say yes when everything inside you is screaming no, because somewhere, deep in your upbringing, you were taught that saying no to family is the same as saying no to God. And that's where the weight becomes unbearable. Because it's no longer just emotional, it becomes spiritual. It feels as if your soul is caught between honoring your family and honoring your sanity. You kneel in prayer, asking God to help you be more patient, more understanding, more tolerant. But what you're really asking for is strength to survive a dynamic that's slowly bleeding you dry. They say guilt is a sign of conscience, of morality. But the kind of guilt you feel in toxic family relationships isn't holy. It's weaponized. It's used to control, to silence, to manipulate. It's the guilt that makes you question your own goodness for choosing distance. It's the guilt that turns your boundaries into burdens. It's the guilt that tells you you're selfish for seeking peace, disrespectful for not tolerating abuse, ungrateful for wanting something more. And it never stops, because no matter what you do, it's never enough. You try to fix things, to be the bigger person, to overlook the same wounds over and over again. But your efforts are not met with gratitude. They're met with expectations. Expectations that you will keep forgiving without change, that you will keep returning to the same pain and calling it loyalty, that you will keep showing up, not because they love you, but because they know how to make you feel guilty if you don't. What they don't see, what no one sees, is what it costs you spiritually, the way you feel distant from God because you're caught in the confusion of what's right, the way you question whether your longing for freedom is rebellion, the way your faith is shaken because you've been taught that suffering in silence is the price of being a good person. But somewhere, deep in your spirit, you know that God is not the author of this torment. God doesn't use guilt as a chain. He doesn't bind you to pain and call it family. He doesn't sit in the corner of your soul and demand that you keep breaking yourself to serve people who refuse to change. That voice telling you to keep sacrificing your peace, that's not divine, that's not holy, that's learned. That's inherited dysfunction, your very sense of identity. You remember the birthdays, the meals, the shared laughter. You remember the moments that made you believe this was worth holding on to. And so the guilt tightens its grip, whispering that walking away from the dysfunction means walking away from love. But what if that's not true? What if love doesn't demand your silence? What if loyalty to God doesn't mean loyalty to abuse? What if the guilt you carry is not a sign of righteousness, but a sign that you've been emotionally and spiritually manipulated to accept less than you deserve? There comes a point in every wounded heart's journey when silence becomes unbearable. Not the kind of silence that brings rest, but the kind that comes from being unheard for too long. You find yourself constantly appeasing, adjusting and dimming your light just to avoid conflict. You answer calls you don't want to answer. You sit in rooms that make your spirit ache. You say yes when every part of you is crying out for no, all for the sake of keeping things peaceful on the outside while you crumble on the inside. You begin to wonder, is this what God wants from me? To live in a constant state of anxiety, to suppress my voice so others can feel comfortable, to betray myself so that others aren't disappointed. The line between peacekeeping and self-destruction becomes blurred. You were taught to love people, to be kind, to avoid conflict, but no one ever taught you the cost of pleasing others at the expense of your own soul, and so you try harder. You try to become the version of yourself that fits their mold. You pretend to be unaffected by their sharp words. You brush off their dismissive tone. You laugh at their jokes, even when they're at your expense. You tell yourself that maybe if you're just a little bit nicer, a little more agreeable, they'll finally see your worth. But they don't. Because the more you shrink to fit their comfort, the more invisible you become. This isn't love. This is survival dressed as loyalty, and slowly your spirit begins to wither. You start losing your joy, your voice, your identity. You become someone even you don't recognize. constantly anxious, constantly performing, constantly aching. And yet there's a voice within you, soft, steady, but growing louder, that says, "This is not what I called you to." That voice is God. He never created you to be a puppet for others' approval. He never asked you to trade your peace for their validation. He never called you to walk on eggshells just to keep people happy. He is not a God of manipulation. He does not ask you to please others at the cost of your own well-being. His call has always been higher, deeper, more sacred. He calls you to protect your peace, not just maintain their comfort. But the decision to step out of the cycle is terrifying, because for so long pleasing people felt like purpose. It felt like righteousness. It felt like love. To choose peace feels like betrayal, until you realize that pleasing others was the real betrayal. The betrayal of your spirit, the betrayal of your calling, the betrayal of the peace that God intended for you to live in from the beginning. You were not placed on this earth to earn love by performance. You were not born to carry the weight of everyone's expectations. You were not created to be a prisoner to toxic loyalty. God's peace isn't found in the absence of conflict, but in the presence of truth. And sometimes the truth is uncomfortable. Sometimes it means saying no. Sometimes it means stepping away. Sometimes it means misunderstood, even rejected by those you love the most. But God honors the one who chooses peace over performance. He honors the heart that walks away from chaos, not in bitterness, but in quiet surrender to Him. When you protect your peace, you are not abandoning love. You are choosing a higher kind of love. The kind that doesn't need to be earned, proven, or begged for. The kind that reflects the love God gives, gentle, safe, and whole. Setting boundaries is one of the most painful things you'll ever do, not because it's harsh, but because it forces you to confront the illusion that love means endurance at all costs, especially in families where silence has been the language of survival and self-sacrifice is seen as a virtue. You were taught that saying no is selfish, that taking space is cold, that asking for respect is disrespectful, and so you spent years making yourself small, believing that love meant absorbing pain rather than confronting it. But eventually, something in you begins to shift. A quiet but persistent longing rises in your chest, not for revenge, not for rebellion, but for peace, for dignity, for a life where your voice matters, and that longing will lead you to the painful threshold of boundaries. You'll second-guess yourself. You'll replay every moment when you tried to speak up and were met with guilt. You'll remember the tears, the accusations, the angry silences. You'll wonder if maybe you're being dramatic. Maybe you're the problem. But then you'll recall the years you spent tolerating disrespect because you didn't want to be seen as difficult. The nights you cried yourself to sleep after conversations that left you hollow. The moments you tried to explain your pain only to be told you were imagining things. Boundaries are not walls, they are doors. They don't shut people out. They invite in only what is healthy. They are not a declaration of war. They are a declaration of worth. And the courage it takes to draw those lines is often misunderstood, especially by those who benefit from you having none at all. You may find that the people you love the most are the ones who push back the hardest. They will question your motives. They will accuse you of being distant, ungrateful, cold, not because they don't love you, but because they never had to confront your pain before. Your compliance was comfortable, your silence was convenient, and now that you are choosing peace over performance, they're faced with a version of you they cannot control. But here's the sacred truth. You can love them and still say, "This is not okay." You can forgive them and still say, "I need space." You can be compassionate and still refuse to be mistreated. God does not ask you to be cruel. He asks you to be clear. And clarity is one of the most loving things you can offer in a relationship. Setting boundaries doesn't make you unkind. It makes you honest. It means you're choosing to deal with your relationships as they are, not as you wish they were. It means you're allowing people to take responsibility for how they treat you, instead of endlessly carrying the burden of keeping the peace by sacrificing your sanity. And yet the guilt will creep in, because you were conditioned to believe that compassion means access, that love means availability, even when it costs you your well-being. But love without truth is not love. It's a performance. And when you live in fear of being labeled unloving for having boundaries, you live in bondage, not freedom. God honors truth. He dwells in clarity. He is not the author of confusion, nor does he require you to be a doormat in order to be holy. Compassion is not the absence of boundaries. It is the reason for them. Because true compassion also includes yourself. It says, I love you, but I will not abandon myself to keep you comfortable. It says, I care about you, but I care about my peace too. You are not unloving for creating distance where you once allowed pain. You are not cruel for choosing silence over chaos. You are not cold for protecting your heart from people who only value you when you're convenient. You are simply learning to honor what God has placed within you, your spirit, your peace, your worth. Letting go is not a moment. It's a slow, agonizing process that unfolds in silence. It's not loud like people imagine. It's not screaming matches or slamming doors. It's not a grand announcement that you're done. Letting go often happens in the quietest of spaces, in the small decisions to stop chasing after the same approval, to stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you, to stop bleeding for those who never asked how the wound felt. But what makes this journey unbearable is the love that still lingers, the love that refuses to die, even when trust has long since been buried, the love that aches not because you want to hate them, but because you still remember who they used to be, or maybe who you hoped they would be. That's the part no one sees, the heartbreak that doesn't come from anger, but from mourning what never was and what might never be. You loved them. With everything in you, you loved them. Maybe they were a parent who raised you but never truly saw you, a sibling who shared your childhood but turned into a stranger, a cousin who used to laugh with you but now competes or gossips behind your back. And so you held on, longer than you should have. You excused things you knew were wrong. You swallowed pain that should have been addressed. You stayed at tables where your soul was starving, simply because the seats were marked family. You prayed for change. You wept into pillows at night, begging God to fix it, to soften their hearts, to open their eyes. You tried everything, talking, silence, forgiveness, distance, coming back again and again, but nothing changed. Or worse, things got more toxic. The same patterns played out on repeat like a painful song you couldn't turn off. And then came the guilt, because when you finally started to pull away, it didn't feel like freedom. It felt like betrayal. Everything in you screamed that walking away was wrong, that you were abandoning them, that maybe if you just tried one more time, things could be different. After all, love doesn't give up, right? That's what you were told. But here's the truth no one says aloud. Letting go is not giving up on love. It's giving up on the fantasy that your love alone can save a relationship. It's surrendering the illusion that if you just love them more, tolerate more, understand more, things will suddenly shift. Sometimes love means letting go, not because you stopped caring, but because you started caring about yourself too. God never asked you to become the sacrifice for someone else's unhealed wounds. He didn't design love to be one-sided, manipulative, or soul-crushing. Love is not meant to destroy your sense of worth. Love is not meant to hold you hostage. Real love, the kind that mirrors God's love, may be fierce and forgiving, but it also has boundaries. It knows when to release what is causing more harm than healing. And this doesn't mean you stop loving them. It doesn't mean you stop praying for them or hoping that one day the veil will lift from their eyes. It doesn't mean you forget the good memories or deny the fact that they still hold a piece of your heart. No, it simply means you refuse to let that love be a reason to keep suffering. You can love them from afar. You can grieve what was and still choose peace. You can wish them well and still protect your own heart. And in doing so, you're not being unfaithful to love. You're being faithful to your healing. There's a deep grief in this kind of letting go. It's not a clean cut. It's a slow release, one prayer at a time, one memory at a time, one decision at a time. Some days it feels like freedom. Other days it feels like you're losing a part of yourself. But even in that grief, there is a sacred truth blooming. You're not abandoning love. You're trusting that real love doesn't require you to suffer in silence. And what you'll discover is that in that release, God meets you. In your loneliness, He comforts. In your guilt, He assures. In your sorrow, He restores. He knows you never walked away in bitterness. He knows your heart was broken when you finally stepped back. And He honors that choice, because He never called you to carry a cross He didn't give you. There's a particular kind of heartbreak that doesn't make sense to the outside world. The kind that cuts deepest when the knife is held by your own blood. Family betrayal is not like any other wound. It's not just the hurt, it's the violation of trust. It's knowing that the people who had front row seats to your vulnerability chose to turn it against you. They knew where your soft spots were. They knew your fears, your insecurities, your silent battles, and instead of protecting them, they exposed them, mocked them, used them. You ask yourself again and again, why would they do this to me? And the silence answers back louder than any scream. You might walk through your days carrying the weight of unanswered questions. They smile in public. They celebrate themselves. They go on as if nothing happened, as if your tears meant nothing, as if their betrayal wasn't betrayal at all. And the hardest part, no one seems to see what they did. The world applauds them while you're left to pick up the pieces in private. It feels like injustice has won, like cruelty is rewarded, like the pain you endured has been erased by their charm and manipulation. And in that place, where justice feels like a distant fantasy, you begin to question everything. You wonder if God saw it, if He cared. You replay the moments they lied about you, twisted your words, painted you as the villain. You remember how they turned others against you, how they poisoned the well behind your back. You remember the looks, the rumors, the sudden coldness from people who once embraced you. All because of the seeds of betrayal planted by those you loved the most. Your heart cries for justice, not revenge, but justice. A deep need to know that what was done in darkness will not stay hidden forever, that your pain will not be in vain, that the sleepless nights, the silent prayers, the broken trust, it meant something, that God was not absent when you were abandoned, that He didn't look away when they betrayed you, and let me tell you this with unwavering certainty, He didn't. God's justice is not always loud. It doesn't always arrive in a way the world can see, but it is always present. He is a God who balances scales, a God who watches over His children with fierce love. And when someone breaks you, especially when they do it in His name, under the roof of family, He does not stand by indifferent. He records every tear, every sigh, every moment you held your tongue to keep the peace, every time you were blamed for what you didn't do. You may not see it yet, but He's already at work, because the same God who parts seas and moves mountains also exposes hidden intentions. He shines light on secrets, He reveals hearts, and in time what was done to you in shadows will be brought to light, not for your humiliation, but for your vindication. The road may be long, it may feel like the ones who hurt you are flourishing. They may gain praise, attention, even positions of honor. But trust this, false foundations always crack. Their actions are being weighed, their choices are being recorded, not by you, but by the one who judges righteously. The God of justice is never in a hurry, but he is never late. And justice doesn't always look like punishment. It looks like exposure. It looks like the truth coming forth at just the right time. It looks like peace being restored to your life while confusion follows theirs. It looks like your rising becoming a mirror they must face. It looks like the people they deceived beginning to see clearly, slowly, surely, divinely, and in the meantime God begins to rebuild you. He strengthens what they tried to weaken. He restores what they tried to destroy. He puts people in your life who speak life instead of death, truth instead of manipulation, honor instead of guilt. And while their mask may still be intact for now, yours is gone. You no longer need to pretend. You no longer need to perform. You're walking in the raw, painful truth, but also in freedom. There's a shift that happens when you realize you don't need to prove anything anymore. You don't need to make them see. You don't need to gather allies or explain your side, because you trust that God sees it all. You believe that the one who sits high also stoops low enough to catch the tears they caused. You know that your story, written by divine hands, will never end in betrayal. It will end in redemption. God is not blind to your suffering. He is not silent in your struggle, and when justice feels delayed, it is only being perfected. Because when He moves in ways that leave no doubt. And while they may have wounded you deeply, they can never outrun the justice of God. From the very beginning, your family begins to write your story. Before you speak, before you choose, before you even understand who you are, they assign you a role. Maybe you were the peacemaker, the fixer, the one who always smiled even when it hurt. Or maybe you were labeled the rebel, the ungrateful one, the one who never fit in. These roles were not based on who you truly were, but on who they needed you to be to maintain their comfort, their narrative, their illusion of unity. And so you became what they expected, out of survival, not choice. You smiled through discomfort. You said, "I'm fine," when your heart was breaking. You stayed silent in the face of unfairness, because speaking up only brought more pain. You spent your life trying to earn love, prove your worth, meet the impossible standards they set, all while secretly wondering if you were ever truly accepted at all. Deep down you carried a quiet ache. What if who I really am isn't enough for them? They saw you through the lens of their own brokenness, and over time you started to believe it. You confused their silence with wisdom, their control with protection, their conditional love with truth. You thought that if you could just fix yourself enough, be good enough, small enough, obedient enough, they would finally see you, love you, choose you. But what happens when that moment never comes? You wake up one day and realize you don't know who you are outside of them. Your identity has been formed around the expectations, judgments, and labels they placed on you. Every decision you make is filtered through their imagined voices in your head. What will they think? Will they be proud of me? Will they talk about me again? You realize that you've spent your life living for their approval and shrinking yourself to avoid their wrath. And then a deeper fear surfaces. Who am I without them? That fear is real, because when you start to pull away from toxic family dynamics, it doesn't just feel like leaving people. It feels like shedding your skin. The identity you wore for so long begins to unravel, and though it was painful, it was familiar. It gave you a sense of place, even if that place was built on dysfunction. Now, stepping into the unknown feels terrifying, lonely, unstable. But it's also where healing begins. Because your identity was never supposed to come from people who couldn't see your value. It was never meant to be shaped by those who only accepted you when you were useful, silent, or agreeable. Your worth isn't defined by how much pain you can tolerate or how much approval you can earn. It's found in the quiet, sacred truth that God sees you, the real you, apart from the roles, the wounds, the dysfunction. He knows your name beyond the nickname they mocked you with. He sees your heart beyond the coldness they showed you. He understands your dreams, your fears, your deepest desires, and none of it is too much for him. You were not made to live in the cage of someone else's narrative. You were made in the image of a God who writes stories of redemption, not control. Healing doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it looks like rediscovery, like slowly remembering what brings you peace, what makes your soul come alive, like building a life not based on guilt, but on grace, like walking in freedom without needing their permission anymore. It's in the moments you realize that your voice matters, even if they never listened. Your feelings are valid, even if they dismissed them. Your story is sacred, even if they tried to rewrite it, and you're allowed to grieve what they never gave you. You're allowed to feel the loss of what could have been, the mother who never nurtured you, the father who never protected you, the siblings who never stood by you. You're allowed to feel angry, heartbroken, confused. Those emotions are not signs of weakness. They are signs that your heart is finally telling the truth. For the first time, perhaps you're seeing things clearly, not through the lens of obligation or tradition, but through the lens of truth and self-worth. You're also allowed to celebrate the person you're becoming, because every step away from that toxic narrative is a step toward who you really are. Every boundary you set is an act of self-respect. Every prayer you whisper is a seed of healing. And slowly, layer by layer, God begins to restore what was lost. He begins to reveal a version of you that was always there, buried under years of trying to belong. This version is not bitter but wise, not hardened but aware, not perfect but whole. You start to walk in rooms differently, not seeking approval but grounded in peace. You speak with more courage, love with more discernment, and live with a new sense of clarity, because you found yourself outside the story they tried to write for you, and in the one God had written all along. You were never weak for trying, you were never foolish for loving them, and you are not wrong for finally choosing yourself. For too long you've carried the weight of expectations that crushed your spirit. You've endured unspoken wounds and walked on emotional eggshells, thinking that maybe, just maybe, if you sacrificed more, they would finally see you. But you're beginning to understand now, your peace matters just as much as your love. God did not call you to be consumed by the chaos of others. He called you to be free. When family becomes the source of your pain instead of your protection, it feels like a betrayal of everything you were taught to believe. But the truth is, healing doesn't always happen where you were hurt. Sometimes healing begins when you take a step away from where you were wounded and walk toward the one who can truly restore you. He is not asking you to carry this pain alone. He never turned away when they dismissed you. He never ignored your tears, your confusion, your prayers whispered in the dark. He was there, always there, watching, waiting, preparing the moment when you would rise from survival into strength. And that moment, perhaps, is now. You are allowed to grieve the family you hoped for and never had. You are allowed to love them and still walk away. You are allowed to break free from roles that were never meant for you. You are allowed to build a new life on truth, not guilt, on grace, not fear, and most importantly, you are allowed to be at peace. Let them misunderstand you. Let them speak without knowing your heart. Let them continue in their illusion, because you don't need to prove anything anymore. God is your witness, and His justice is not delayed. It is deliberate, it is divine. You are not created to merely exist in rooms that suffocate you. You are made to thrive, to grow, to become. And every time you choose healing over hatred, clarity over chaos, peace over pleasing, you are honoring not just yourself, but the God who never stopped loving you. So breathe. The war within is ending. The silence you endured has been rewritten by God's, and your peace is not only possible, it's promised. Now walk in it.